Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Hello, Atheists in Recovery land, and welcome to episode 45 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And this episode continues with our 4-part series of recovery under quarantine. And I have a great guest for you today. She's a person in long-term recovery, and she also is a therapist. And so we talk a lot about what it's like to be in recovery when you have multiple people in your household, and so real practical examples of how to ask for what you want, and then also being okay with not knowing what it is you want. I know it sounds confusing, but we have this uncertainty going on around us. We're all suffering under this sort of collective loss and grief. And so she talks a lot about priorities and respecting boundaries and mental health resilience. We cover a lot. I'll just say that we cover a lot. And so I hope you enjoy the show. On to my guest. Julie Cole is a person in long-term recovery, a licensed social worker, certified addictions counselor, licensed addiction counselor, and certified health coach. Julie works with individuals and families impacted by substance use and those seeking to improve their overall health and wellness. All right, guys, let's get started. Julie Cole, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start this conversation by inquiring about your spiritual background from childhood.
Well, let's see. That's a loaded question. I was not raised with any kind of spiritual beliefs in my home. So my parents took me long enough to be confirmed, but I was raised, my parents did send me to Christian schools, which is an interesting juxtaposition. And so I had a lot of ideas that may have been taught to me externally, but they weren't really reinforced at home. So they didn't get internalized. So I really came into an adult with no set belief system. Actually, in fact, I had, and probably still have more questions than anything. So I'd like to say I'm maybe a seeker.
Yeah. Yeah. I think being curious is fine. Right.
Now I have fallen into more formal structures as an adult, but I think that I have still come at it with a very good dose of cynicism and even mistrust. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love to ask that question because I feel like our spiritual background or a religious background has just this formative milieu on who we become. Yeah.
I feel like I connect with something. There's something that happens in my soul. It's a very personal internal process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not anything that is bound to an external belief structure.
Mm-hmm.
So I would identify myself, and nowadays I do attend a church and things like that, but where I go right now is a place where a lot of people have been spiritually wounded. So we're all kind of like navigating this thing together.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you.
It's just an interesting walk.
So I wonder if we can now talk a little bit about your recovery journey before we get into the conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm currently 44 years old. I found recovery when I was 22, and traditional 12-step recovery story. There's nothing terribly exciting about it. I think one thing that's really important to note is that I'm just not a believer that 12-step recovery is the only path. I think there's many, many pathways, and that I have dedicated a lot of my professional life to developing pathways for other people to access. Because in the professional world, we've taken on this 12-step orientation. We've really limited a lot of people from accessing resources that would be functional or helpful for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to believe that I pull little pieces along the way for that too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you had a foundation of 12-step recovery, but you've also added other things in as you've gone through the process.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of people do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the bigger piece is that's my personal pathway choice. I don't believe that should be everybody's.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So I wanted to have you on today. You're also a therapist, and I thought you would be a really good person to come on and just talk about first maybe talk about addiction, as it's often called the disease of isolation. And as I'm recording this, we're in the midst of COVID-19, and we're telling people to stay home, which of course can increase their depression and anxiety. Maybe they also feel less like going online. So maybe talk a little bit about isolation as it relates to relapse and some ways that we can prevent it. Yeah.
Well, I know that that is a common concern I'm hearing from people in recovery. How do we make sure that we're accessible for folks who are trying to find recovery? And how are we supporting people who may be at risk for returning to use for any number of reasons? And so I think that with everything, there's the problematic side of things, and then there's also the the opportunities. So there's detrimental pieces of it, which is isolation, lack of connection, especially folks who may be older or really struggling with the technological pieces. And so an interesting thing is that we have some folks who are older who may be like decades into their recovery process who are feeling very isolated and disconnected. And how do people connect with those folks meaningfully? Then also, how do we offer resources to the newcomers? And so isolation can be something that can really mess with somebody's head. And so we were talking before we started, and I think there's so much of this that needs to be normalized for people, because one common trait for people who have a history of substance use is this kind of idea that they are isolated and alone even when they're socially connected. And so I think that can be amplified in this. One of the things to understand is that if you're feeling really ambivalent or like you have a lack of motivation right now, that's totally normal. And so I think people are having to really, it's almost like moving through mud to get into picking up a phone or accessing resources online. And so one thing that I've been talking with a lot of people about is how do you build it into a daily schedule so that it's just something you do, because motivation is not a feeling. A lot of people are really tired hearing that more and more and more. And I'm struggling with it myself. I mean, just really just tired and really struggling with a lot of fatigue and boredom.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. An interesting thing about research around substance use is that one of the key markers or risk factors for return to use is chronic stress, partially because of the way it activates the nervous system and keeps everybody kind of in fight or flight. It takes us out of conscious brain and takes us out of this frontal lobe that kind of thinks through things and puts us in this very reactive state. And everybody's kind of in that right now, which is why we're tired. Which is why we're tired. And so people may actually be, even though they feel sluggish and more tired, people may actually be more reactive than they think they are. So that piece of our brain that goes straight from like this decision to that one without the stopgap in the middle may actually be more likely. So not just with substance use, but with food. There's a meme that's going around, everybody's kind of laughing at it. It's like talking about unemployment servers, and it showed this one little tiny server in this little tiny room, and then he said Pornhub servers, and it was like a huge room full of servers, but like there's a lot of truth to that. People will fall into the escape behaviors more likely in times like this. And how do we sit with that understanding that we're going to probably fall into some escape behaviors and find stop gaps or accountability to not do it if we need to? I don't know if that makes sense. So I think that that's another piece. Distractedness is another one. A lot of people feel really distracted and unable to focus. And so even for people who are accessing online resources, I'm hearing I'm being distracted by watching people on Zoom. I'm being distracted by, trying to do other things like cook dinner or do those kinds of things while I'm listening to a meeting, or I'm listening to this TED Talk, or I'm listening to this audiobook. And so I think we like to think that we're more focused, but we're actually more distracted. And so I think owning all of these things as a truth for everybody right now is really important to allowing ourselves some grace and a call to accountability for ourselves. A lot of people are really frustrated. I don't know about for you in therapy, but this week I've heard a lot of frustration. A lot of people who had some really good skills on deck who are really working through expanding their mental flexibility, developing some emotional resilience, and really kind of finding a breadth of thought processes around their life are starting to fall back into this either or, shoulds.
I've heard this.
Must.
I've heard this too. Yeah. The shoulds and the oughts are coming back.
Yeah. Absolutely. I shouldn't be eating like this. I shouldn't be thinking like this. I'm so lazy. I feel like everybody else has got a side hustle. I mean, I'm hearing all of these things and I'm going, there's some element of letting go of what other people are doing or what it looks like and understanding that most of us put our best foot forward on social media.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing is not reality.
It's
And
not.
I have a number of people that I know personally who they look like life is so good on the outside, but it's a complete mess when you actually get into the trenches with them.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say it's almost best to limit your social media right now if the goal is to build up the resiliency during a time of this. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that in news media,
yes,
limiting consumption of that kind of stuff. I think a lot of people are really struggling with anxiety and worry for 100 different reasons. I mean, we could go into all the different ways. I mean, I have people they're worried their kids are going to backslide. They're not accessing the resources they need in school because the schools are closed. And so they're now trying to homeschool a child with this, a specific special or a learning need that they can't meet. People are worried about their financial status and if they're going to lose their jobs or if they have lost their jobs or if they're going to lose their small businesses. People are worried about the economy. Some people think it's Armageddon and the world's coming to an end. The conspiracy theories are going crazy right now. So there's all of this stuff. So I would also say the one thing that I'm seeing that's interesting for me is that a lot of people are getting to the end of their escape behaviors.
Tell me more about that.
People have engaged in and so I usually put it in the context of food because that's a tangible one. A lot of people can really, without a whole lot of shame, own.
I could be under this category. Keep going.
Yeah. My husband keeps telling the kids the Nutter Butters are mommies, So this piece where we're falling back in old patterns of behavior, like maybe it's just a comfort food that we eat when we're stressed or we're sick. And now we're eating it all the time instead of some of the time. And what I'm seeing now is that because this thing has we're really in this real waiting space where people aren't sure when it's going to end, when things are going to open back up, what it's going to look like in the end. And we're kind of forced to just reckon with the now. Like people are getting sick of it. They're getting sick of the food they're eating, right? They're getting sick of watching Netflix. They're getting sick of doing these things, right? Even I had a friend said that they're even just to the end of Tinder hookups. Like they're
oh no.
You know what I mean? But it's people are reckoning with the fact that these things aren't it's all empty. They're, so people are actually at home. They can't run back out to the next thing and really kind of get distracted from the fact that they feel like crap when they eat this food, or this show really isn't doing something for them, or the mindless sex really just is empty at the end. And what they're seeking is real connection and moving further away from it.
Yeah. There's just this sense of uncertainty, which is big. And I don't think that, obviously I don't get political on the podcast, but it bears mentioning that there is a level of just uncertainty with next steps with the administration and what we can expect. And you haven't really seen that in other countries where things are very much laid out and this is what you can expect. And this is how long we're going to be in isolation. And everything's really sort of is laid out as much as possible. And so that I think adds to the stress and the anxiety.
Well, I mean, as small business owners, one of the things we did when this all started and we kind of, shut everything down and went to telehealth. I mean, so we not only do therapy, but we also do health coaching and we have a gym. Wow. So we shut down our gym portion. And then now they've told us we can do one-on-one personal training if we want. But for me, I can't, I'm home with my kids 24/7. I have two grandparents that are sets of grandparents that help keep the kids a lot of the time. And they are both of the grandmothers have COPD. So we can't expose the kids to them right now. So I'm home 24/7 with my kids.
Wow.
And so it's an interesting thing of how do I get out and hustle when I'm having to do this? And so I think one thing that's helpful is that people have to get crystal clear about what their priorities are in this moment. right? And when I say that, I'm not talking about even big level values. I'm talking about the first thing I have to think about every day is how do I prioritize my recovery and my mental health? So for me, what I do, there's 3 things I do every single day to feel human. And that's what I'm asking people now. What are you doing every day to feel human? I take a shower. That's big for me. Even if I don't wash my hair, like it's like there's something that makes me feel human about shaving my legs.
I love it.
I mean, seriously, I'm like, it's a neurotic thing for me, but that's okay. We'll get into that. For me, now I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so now I have a kindergartner and a 3rd grader who I've moved to doing home like crisis schooling. Right.
Okay.
So now I've taken on this role. So that has to be another priority. In fact, behind my mental health and probably some days actually ahead of my mental health, if I'm being honest, I don't intend it to be that way, but like, there and they need me.
Yeah.
So I've been really intentional about not putting kids in the number 1 spot and letting everything else with me fall behind that.
Yes.
But homeschooling, caring for my kids, so prioritizing my mental health and my recovery, taking care of my kids, keeping my house together. When we're in it 24/7, it's got to have some semblance of structure for me. And I'm not talking even about the schedule. I'm real flexible with the schedule because I'm like, who cares if they're up at 11 o'clock at night? Because we're going to be home for at least another 5 weeks. So we got time. It's like summertime, but with homeschooling. And then, of course, my therapy practice, like trying to keep my folks, stay connected with my folks.
Yeah.
Those are my priorities. If I get all of those in,
that's a great day.
To win. And actually with my therapy, I've tried to put everybody to as like a very limited amount of time.
Okay.
Because what I was finding was I was trying to just schedule at all hours of the day and night. And then I was just having to drop things and try to come up here and get in the office and get the kids settled. And it was so now they know these are the times that mom's doing this. I can also schedule my husband to be home some during those times and he can block out time in his schedule. And it's become more manageable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I really like the piece about what are you going to do today to make you human. I think that should be something that we write out and put in front of us, like on our computer and look at it every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people, I've heard from other people, I ask my clients that at the beginning of every session, what are you doing every day to feel human? And for some people, it's their sleep hygiene. I think that's a big one for people right now. Like it'd be real easy to allow yourself to stay up watching Netflix until 2 or 3 in the morning and then sleep in real late. I think a lot of people are being intentional, and that's one of mine. I get up at 7:30 every morning, no matter what, because if not, I could creep in and the girls and I could sleep in until 11 or 12 if I let us. A lot of people want to move their bodies. So, work out from home. I think that is probably one place where people really have to be cautious on social media because I'm going to ruffle some feathers, but the mid-level marketing stuff is blowing up right now. But everybody's an online coach right now. And so they're recording all these videos and putting all this stuff about if you're not hustling, then you're not doing anything and there's no excuses and you really love yourself, you'll do all this stuff. And that could really amplify. Like for me, I own a gym and I'm not working out every day.
Yeah.
I'm not even getting out and walking every day some days. I'm just trying to allow myself the space to honor my energy. If I'm tired, I don't force myself because those things make me more tired and actually push me away from my priority for the day, which is my recovery and my mental health, my kids, keeping my house together, and my telehealth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to give yourself some grace for sure.
That's right. So a lot of people are really starting to tune in and focus on their nutrition. Some of it's not necessarily focusing on perfect nutrition. It's really more about like, okay, what do I do to not eat a whole ice cream today? How do I not eat Nutter Butters every day or 2 times a day, right? How do I make some swaps? Like for me, I eat something with green in it for every meal. Like I just have to do that. It helps my mental acuity and my emotional state. It also reduces how much shit I'm eating. So, and then I do see some friends who are, defining their things. So I have some friends who've taken on and really leaned into their at-home business or their mid-level marketing thing, and it's working really well for them. And that's okay. They're really developing their side hustle during this time, and it's working really well for them. And that's okay too. I've seen some folks who've taken on some competency building. My husband and I actually both took time to finish a nutrition certification that we've been wanting to finish, and it was actually really enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it a lot. And it offered me some perspective on where I am right now in terms of my nutrition.
As if you needed more pressure. Like,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. And then I think that there's a really good, principle in positive psychology, which is this 3 free. What can we do every day? That's the 3 things I do, everything that's, every day that's free.
Uh-huh.
And so there's a lot for that. And so for some people in our house, it's music. Like, well, our music isn't free because we have it on Spotify, but you know what I mean? Like, music can be free. So what can you do? Like with the girls, we have this thing where we just turn the music up all the way and dance all over the house for a little while. So that helps people.
Yeah, it's really hard to dance and cry at the same time.
Exactly. Well, I mean, depends on the music and the mood, but
that's true. I mean, I guess maybe if you need to cry, then please do cry. But
well, and I think it's like there's time to honor the grief, and there's time to celebrate and lean into joy. And I can't do both. I think that for me, at different times in my life, I've leaned completely into the grief or the melancholy and really let that envelope me. And then I've taken times to really just I have chased joy to the point where I don't honor the other side of it. And so for my life today, I really try to see my emotional state as a spectrum, and I can experience the whole spectrum in a day. And actually that's really kind of wholehearted living if I do it, and it's okay.
And wholehearted living, can you tell the audience what that is?
Sure. So it's like this concept from Brene Brown. I don't want to take something that's not mine. And she really introduced wholehearted living in her The Gift of Imperfection book. And she talked about research she did. And what they found is that over time, she was seeing people who had these really a lot of emotional resilience to their life. And so she started really digging into that, and she started realizing those folks really had capacity to identify a lot of different emotional states in their life, and that on average, a lot of people can only identify like 6 or 8 emotional states, but a person who's wholehearted can identify up to like 35 or 36, which blows my mind.
Yeah, that's
right.
Interesting.
It feels like a really evolved person. And right now, if we're really experiencing 4 or 5 emotional states, that's okay. That's okay. But I think the important part about it is just being mindful of the fact that we have this idea, and if you're going off the social media world, that everything has to be joyful and beautiful all the time. And that's not the reality of life. The reality of life is that so much of it is mundane, the day to day. It's the journey. And so, how do we lean into just experiencing life as it is in the moment versus escaping escaping into the concept of a possible future event or rumination over the past, which people in addiction live in those 2 states. So lots of regret and lots of hope.
Yeah. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about, so how do we expect respect to those boundaries when, there are sometimes 2, 3 generations living in one household, and you're not working from home, you're working with home, and you're working with children. And okay.
Well, it's interesting. I will say this. One thing I'm observing this week too, probably more than any other time so far, is that everybody thinks their at-home situation is specifically unique. So if you're working from home, there was a situation where somebody texted, they're like, I still have to actually go into work every day. I wish I could be home. And I'm like, but there's people at home wishing they could be at work. There's people working from home who have kids. There's people who are furloughed who are stressed about their finances and can't focus on the kids. And so everybody, there's this, we were talking about the externalization that can happen. Everybody's looking at everybody else and thinking they've got it better. And the truth is so much of what boundaries are is being clear on who and what I am in any given moment, not trying to control the external world. And a lot of the times, and one of the things I do with a lot of families is we have to get really clear on who we are in the moment, because boundaries are about me communicating what's okay and not okay, or what I need not trying to manipulate or control another person to do what I want them to do.
Yeah.
And it's a really clear distinction and a really fine one, because a lot of what we hear, especially for families that are dealing with addiction, so loved ones who have a person who's in addiction, like a lot of the stuff they're taught about boundaries is to try to control an outcome for their loved one instead of just be clear about who and what they are, right? And so that creates this environment where, if our loved one's okay, then we're okay. But if they're not okay, we're not okay. And then it becomes this cycle where we're all up and down versus like, this is where I am.
Yep.
This is my values. This is my beliefs. This is what is okay and not okay for me. And, you have the freedom to be you, but you can't bring this certain piece into my world if it's going to disrupt this piece. And so I think a huge piece of boundaries is being clear of the fact that we're all autonomous beings and I only have control over myself. And that includes really working to respect the boundaries of someone else. And I'm using personal examples because I'm just in the pit of it right now.
Yeah.
But for me, that means with my kids, I recognized yesterday that one of my children was on a Zoom call with two of her little friends. And I'm like walking over every 5 minutes to like check in and read what they're writing to each other on the chat function. And I'm like, later I told my husband, I was like, something's off because I don't feel like I felt like there was a mistrust of her in that moment. And I'm like, I'm doing like, there's something off. I'm trying to control her and not trust her to make those decisions for herself and to navigate that. I'm trying to control that scenario. So in that scenario, I wasn't, there wasn't a clear boundary for me. It was it was permeated and she felt it. She was like, Mom, what are you doing? Mom, why are you reading over my shoulder? Mom, what is going on? I'm like, I'm sorry. And so there's, and it's a perfect example of how we try to overcompensate when we realize it and try to make them feel better, give ourselves away by trying to take control.
Yeah.
And so that's the piece, is that in that moment, I feel like there's some measure of control. Like, what am I worried about? I'm worried that she's going to be inappropriate with her friends. I'm worried that her friends are going to be inappropriate with her. They're at this nice, fun age where they're learning things they shouldn't learn and sharing it with each other. And, third graders, I can remember being in third grade. What is the real issue here? And so the bigger thing is not putting all that on her and make her responsible for my role as a parent.
Yeah.
And so when we taking that out to an example of substance use and addiction, a lot of times what family members do is they feel uncomfortable or they worry about their loved one and they just want them to act right so that they don't have to worry or be embarrassed or be ashamed or be whatever it may be. It's still an externalization and they're not clear on who and what they are. So the focus becomes their loved one, and their loved one is the sole provider of peace and security. And when we're living in homes with other people, like the idea that the other person can bring me peace or security, they can offer an environment where I can feel peace and security, but they can't give me peace and security.
I love that. They can't give me peace and security.
No, people can certainly take it away, but it still has to be something that's given. And there's a lot of nuances to that. So I have to be really careful because this still has to be given, but there's a lot of complexities to that in terms of behavioral science and things like that. But in this moment, when I get tired or overwhelmed, it's really hard for me not to look at my husband and go, make me feel better. Make me feel better.
Yeah.
Say the right thing, do the right thing, be the right person. And the problem is when I do that, it doesn't matter what he does. I always want more. And so earlier we were talking about this externalization, that in the moment externalizing to the other person makes us feel power, makes us feel control. It's a small piece. It's like having a 5-year-old and counting down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and having them do what you want them to do. Right? But what happens over time is that it takes more of that to achieve that result. It's like its own it's like substance use. It's like its own its own thing that we become intoxicated by because we need more of it because it's fake, it's false, it's unreal, it's superficial. And so the hard part about expecting somebody to give us something that they can't give us, or expecting that we can give something that we can't give to somebody we can't give to them, because that happens too, is we want to try to give it away to make other people better, is that in the end, it leaves us all completely out of control.
Mm.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people sitting in the truth of that right now. That's really, really hard. Really hard.
Yeah. So how do you navigate that? So certainly you want to bring the focus back to your inner self.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things, strategies. A lot of times people can identify the emotional state first before the thought. And so sometimes it's like taking a minute to just be still and dial in and say, what is it I'm feeling right now? Is it anxiety? Is it fear? Is it depression? And then taking a minute, just to observe that. A strategy that I use with some of my clients is seeing our thoughts and feelings is like just sitting still and just imagining them being like cabs in Times Square, like flying by. If we ride one of them, it's like taking the choice to jump in that cab and ride it, and ride it down to wherever it takes us. Usually it's kind of crazy town, right? And I say that tongue in cheek, by the way. And there's an exercise you can do where you sit back and you step back and you go, okay, this is anxiety. I don't have to write it down. What's the thought it's that thought setting? How do we identify the thought that comes with that? And so some of it's just identification. For most people, it's even just taking the time to even be able to stop and identify it. Because most of us just react. We just go. And so earlier we were talking about if we're all in fight or flight right now, which we are on some level, right? There's some low level of anxiety, stress, fear going on for everybody right now. And if we're in that, then that piece of our brain that says, okay, this is a cab, I can either jump in or not jump in, right? That part gets disrupted and we just go in it. So sometimes just sitting still and taking the time to observe it, or to take the time to go lock yourself in the bathroom and go, why am I feeling like this? What is this? Gives us a chance to disrupt the behavior. Because the hard part about it is once I act out on it, it becomes the thing, right? It's like if I use if I drink one beer, or if I, go by, if I use cocaine or whatever the thing is for anybody, like once the behavior starts, it's so much harder to come back and undo it. So for me, what I've had to do and what I'm working with some of my clients on is like, okay, let's just stop and identify it. You have to identify it first. Awareness is key. It's not the answer,
but it's a start.
It's the start. Yes. And so, if we were in a non-COVID world, I would have somebody observe themselves as they went throughout the week and say, what are my dominant thoughts about this situation? Let me name that. This is fear. This is anxiety. This is this. And work on just naming it and labeling it and not, and then trying to let go of the emotion attached to it. And so we can still do that. It's just harder to do it in this because we're tired, we're distracted, we're ambivalent, and we're bored. And so having a little patience with ourselves. So that's one strategy that I've been working on with people, and keeping it simple, not keeping it like people can't do complicated, internal work right now.
Can you talk a little bit more about the practical piece of that? This has come up in my practice. How do you sit with the emotion that you're having and then explain it to the others that you're with 24/7 and then ask for some compassion almost?
Right. So I was telling you beforehand, what I recognized the other day is that sometimes I can't even identify the need associated with it. I just can't even, and I'm skilled at doing this. Like my husband and we do this type of therapy called Imago, where we dialogue and we dig into it. And there's a lot of identification and empathy and summarization and validating. I can't even get into that right now because I'm like, I have no idea. So I think it's okay, for us to just say, like, I told him the other day, it's hard for me to ask for what I need because I don't know that I'm struggling to identify that.
Yeah.
And so that was helpful for me because I was doing this thing where I was like, make me better, make me feel better. You're not doing this, and I caught myself being like, don't do that like that. And don't talk like that. And don't breathe.
Don't breathe. Please stop living.
Stop breathing. With my kids, it's like, stop smacking your food. Like, that's the thing that's driving me nuts right now. I can hear them no matter where I am in the house. I'm
That's
like, oh
funny.
my gosh. And so like really kind of taking control of my own stuff and saying, would you please mind chewing with your mouth closed? And understanding that maybe we need to put on some ambient music while we're having dinner so I can't hear as much of it. And I say all that to say that the practical piece is sometimes we're not clear on that, but for me, I start seeing myself grab at other people to try to make my emotional state better. And that's my sign, and so why am I getting agitated with my kids about eating dinner? Because I'm tired and I want a break. And so, for me, the practical piece is sometimes it's just asking my loved ones to say, like, I don't know what I need. Just understand. I keep telling my husband, imagine that you were home 24 hours a day for weeks on end with the kids without being able, like, without leaving the house. And he was like, I would lose my mind.
Yeah.
I said, that's it. And so it kind of puts him back into it. And then he starts going, like, oh, wow, like I would, thank you for everything you're doing. And there comes this part where he kind of recognizes, and leans into that. And I'm doing that on the other token because he's going to work and he's taking on the stress of the financial aspect of our home
Yeah.
because we own our business together
Yeah.
and we've had a reduction in our business. He's taking on the stress of, he's still meeting with some people in person
Okay.
because we need to be able to do what we got to do to keep the business going.
Yeah.
And he works a lot with teenagers and like he's had a lot of new kids come into the practice, like initiate with him and meeting him. He's like, I'm not going to do a telehealth session to start with a teenager. So we just do everything we can to just scan. We ask anybody if they've been exposed or if they're symptomatic to please not come, and we weigh that risk. But I have to remember that he's also got this stress. So I'm thinking of my situation and only my situation. And I'm thinking, oh, he gets to leave the house or he gets to go do this or he gets to do that. And the truth is that he's like, you get to stay home and not worry about if you're being exposed and exposing your family.
Yeah.
You kind of worry about taking care of the kids in the house and I worry about the finances. And so I think that the practical piece of it is also not only, I think it really starts with us understanding that everybody's situation, like everybody has weight in this.
Yes.
So the person who has to leave to go to work, they have weight in this. The person who's home with kids all the time, they have weight in this. The person who's home with no social connection.
No social connection, wishing that they had a somebody right now.
Absolutely. There are a lot of people who have medical conditions that are on hold at the moment. They're deathly afraid to go to the doctor or to go to a hospital to get surgery or they're not even doing those things right now. So I think that part of it is what I'm seeing a lot of people do now is get really frustrated with the external world. Maybe it comes out as frustration. It comes out as anger. It comes out as it's not fair. Like this isn't fair. And the truth is that if I non-COVID world or COVID world, if I externalize, the world's going to seem really unfair and unbalanced. So what do I do? The practical piece is I can't ask for what I need if I'm not taking time to just take to connect with myself. So that's why for me, I do the 3 things to feel human every day. I take a shower because there's just something that feels better about I don't necessarily get out of pajamas and I wore earrings and a little bit of makeup and a dress for you, but the most days I will dry my hair, but no makeup,
Yeah.
Pajamas or workout clothes, which I live in 24/7 in a non-COVID world anyway, and that kind of stuff. But I take a shower every day. There's something that for me feels human. There's something that feels less sluggish, more alive, more emotionally and mentally connected when I feel clean. The other piece is, getting up at the same time every day offers me consistency. It almost guarantees that I'm going to have some schedule to my life each day. It also keeps me mindful of getting to bed by a certain time. And the other piece for me is the intentional alone time. I get up at 7:30 and I spend an hour by myself before I get anybody else up. My husband's usually up and out of the house by that time anyway, before I get the kids up. And that's my time for my mental health.
Yeah.
And so I connect with myself in the morning and I'm like, I'm honest with myself. I mean, when I'm sitting in I sit in this chair right here and I'm sitting there and I'm being quiet and this feeling of crushing anxiety is hitting me. I'm like, why am I waking up with anxiety? And there's this curious state for me. And I think that's the last piece is it's easy to get critical. It takes courage to be curious
Yeah.
with ourselves and with other people. And so I'm curious, why am I feeling anxious? I just woke up. There's literally nothing going on in this house right now. Nobody's up, nobody's doing anything, but I'm feeling this crushing weight of anxiety. So what's going on with me in this moment? If I didn't take that hour, I'd start out with that anxiety and it would go straight to the kids and straight to the husband and straight to the whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's about being connected. And maybe it's that I go, okay, I can identify why I'm feeling anxious right now. So maybe I just need to have a little grace with everybody. And so we take it a little bit more easy getting up. We take it a little bit more easy with the schoolwork, and we focus maybe just today on getting done what has to be turned in, because we have this nice little packet with all of this stuff. But the teachers have finally fine-tuned, like, we're going to turn in these assignments for grades, and the rest of it we need to get done just so they keep their skills up.
Got it.
Yep. That day, maybe we'll just do what has to be turned in.
Yeah.
We do the bare minimum, and then we go outside and we play all day. So it helps me stay connected with what I can manage that day. And then that goes out to the people around me.
Yes. Put the mask on you first, and then you can put the mask on everyone else.
That's right. Especially since mine are little.
Yeah. Right. So I'm wondering if you had like maybe any last words for the community, anything that, that's come to mind that you want to share before we wrap up today.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of people who think this is bullshit, but it's not. Like, once you practice it, you recognize that it's not. Like, and it's this piece of being gentle with yourself. Being aware is a gift and a curse. So having awareness and sitting with our emotional state and identifying it can be really empowering for us to do something positive with it, but it can also be the invitation to abuse ourselves and other people. And so that practice of self-compassion or being gentle with ourselves and saying, like trying to identify those really rigid thoughts like should, could, always, never, and then soften those a little bit. I think that's really important right now. I think that's probably a key skill, and it will keep us from externalizing to other people and getting frustrated. It really kind of brings our emotional state back into the hula hoop we're standing in and into a perspective and a view that's manageable.
Yeah. I'm hoping that there's more research that comes out of this mindfulness meditation, these interventions, and how it can help addiction, because I really do see this new wave forming. And there's just always this lag between research and practice that drives me crazy.
Yeah. How do you quantify it in addiction and recovery? That's one of the biggest challenges for the research community.
Well, Julie, thanks so much for being on. And I want to ask, how can people best find you and all the awesome work that you're doing in the community?
Great. We have a website. It's just www.colewellness.com, colewellness.com. And then we're on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. And then we have a YouTube channel, and we're on Spotify and iTunes for our Cole Wellness podcast. And all of those are at the handle at Cole Wellness. Excellent. If you see a tree with, roots on it, it's black and white. That's our symbol. That's us.
Okay, great. Yep. I'll put all that into the show notes for our session. All right. Well, Thanks again so much for being on.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate everything. It gave me some perspective this morning that I actually really needed. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.